So Tara Scott from Revitalize, we had tried to do a Facebook Live, and due to technical difficulties, we're unfortunately going to have to record this and post this. So I know you won't be able to ask your questions live, but we will be checking the post and answering. So I'm here with my friend Salena Rothenberger. She's a health coach. But Salena, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Salena, and I practice functional health and wellness. I'm a health coach in Texas, and I collaborate with other doctors. I also have my own practice where I teach others natural methods of healing so they can regain their health and vitality. And I really focus on those that have autoimmunity and gastrointestinal disorders and challenges.
So Salena and I met in a functional space, and we have an accountability group that we meet weekly and discuss business, but we also discuss cases and collaborate. So both of us share a passion in genetics for our own personal reasons. So there's a lot of overlap in what we're doing. So we thought it would be really great if we did a short podcast on genetics. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and start and give our 101 of genetics. And then Salena, I'm going to ask you to hop in and talk about epigenetics. Yeah. So basically, just a primer for genetics is that we have 23 chromosomes, and on each chromosome are genes, and things that make up genes are alleles. So we weren't even able to map the human DNA till 2003, and since then we now find out what is, quote, normal or the wild type. So when we're talking about genetics, there are some things that are big differences, like Down syndrome. That's a whole chromosome that's either repeated or a part of chromosome that's broken off to make it look like there's a third chromosome in the 21st spot. So we're generally not talking about those large genetic issues. We're usually talking about what's called a SNP, SNP, or a single nucleotide polymorphism. So DNA is like a ladder. And so there's DNA on each end. There's these nucleotides that are like the stair or the rungs in the stair step. So each of these are nucleotide. So when we're talking about a single location, it's a single one. So if you have a ladder that you're hopping up and you just have one rung that's broken, it's probably not a huge consequence. The same thing is if you have one light, well, maybe not Christmas light, because if you have one Christmas light that's not working, sometimes the whole light goes out. So that's not probably a good example. But so when we're talking about genetics, we're talking about looking at your DNA, usually through a testing company, and then looking if you have differences in these single locations, which are called SNPs. And so, for example, when we look at your genetics, it's like spell check on your computer. There's spell check, but then there's also grammar check. So some genetic companies only do what's called a spell check. So sometimes they're going to miss things. And when we're talking about differences in genetics, we talk about your heterozygote. If you have one gene from your mom and one gene from your dad, and you have one issue that's a little bit different, that'd be heterozygote. If you have one gene, if you have both, that's a little bit different, it'd be homozygote. And if you have two that are the same, it'd be a wild type. And again, in some genes, you can't say there's a right or a wrong or a wild type, because it'd be like blue eyes or brown eyes. There's not no right race. So most of the time we're talking about proteins and enzymes in what we're checking in the way your body functions. So an enzyme is something that takes a compound from one way to another, or like a highway, I like to look at it. So when we're talking about some SNPs, some of them have some significance, and they change the way that the DNA is telling your body to make a protein. So for example, if you think you're coming to see me and you're coming to see Dr. J. Scott, someone's referred you to see me, J-A-Y, but then you see me and I walk in and you think, well, that's a female. I thought I was seeing Dr. J. Scott, but somebody made a typo and it's Joy, J-O-Y. So I'm still a doctor. I'm a female, not a male, but I'm still a human, and I can still help you. So that change in that J to Joy didn't make a huge difference. I made a little bit of a difference. And then if I said to you, hey, are you coming too, or are you two coming? T-O-O and T-W-O is a different word, but when you hear it, you can still understand it. So there's some SNPs that don't really change the meaning or change it so mildly that the effect isn't any different. And similarly, certain SNPs like color, C-O-L-O-R and C-O-L-O-U-R, only tell you where you are geographically, and that's how Ancestry.com can actually tell where you are. So I just got back from Australia, and they say realize with an S, and color, and they spell estrogen, O-E-S, estrogen. So the spellings are different for a lot of words, but it's still English. We can still communicate, and that is going to tell me where someone's from, how they spell certain things. Now, some SNPs don't make any sense at all. So, for example, if I wanted you to feed the cat, and I said feed the cut, C-U-T, that doesn't make any sense at all. So there's some SNPs when you have the difference that it's very different. So one of the things that Salena and I both do with our patients is first we have to try to get a history of what's going on and try to think about the mechanics of your body, and then we order genetic testing. But everybody seems to panic about, I have this gene, I have that gene, right, Salena? So why don't you kind of go over and tell everybody what epigenetics is?
Okay. Yeah, so that's exactly what happens, is that people get their tests back, and now it's like, oh my goodness, what do I do? Because I have these SNPs, I have all these problems, and that is where the epigenetics is so important. And it's really, that's where we need to really focus our time on. The genetic side of it is just kind of giving us some of the building blocks that we have, but it's how we put these building blocks together and what is affecting that building. And one of the things that there's this great study, it's the agouti mice, that we've talked about you and I talked about quite a bit, these two identical mice that they've got the exact same genes, the same mother, they're identical, the same, but they are very, very different because of the environment that their mother, they were in while their mother was raising them. So the food that they gave the mom during the pregnancies was very different, and the mice became very, very different. One is very obese, prone to a lot of different diseases, where the other one's very, very healthy, based on those epigenetic factors, which was the food and the environment that the mother was raised in turn, that the children are raised in. So when we look at the epigenetics, we have to look at our environment, but also what was our mother's health like whenever she was pregnant with us? And then what was her mother's health like? Because all those kinds of things trickle down. So like in that agouti mice, that, this obese mouse, what happened to her is now going to also translate into her offspring. And so that's why it's really, really important to, once you get your genetics, is to put them into context of your diet, your lifestyle, and your history. Really dig into your history and looking for clues. We're looking for patterns. We really got to become detectives. And the thing is that it's not just me and Dr. Scott. You have to also become a detective with us, because it's your body that you've been in 24/7, and we're not always there. So, getting where you're starting to get aware of your surroundings, aware of, things that are affecting your health, and to listen to your symptoms and that instinct that we have that, oh, you know what, I think there's a problem here, and to explore those kinds of things.
Do you have an example in a patient that you've worked with, like how epigenetics came into play?
Yeah, so I've got like all of everybody. Epigenetics comes into play with everyone.
Well,
I'll give you one. I'll just hone down on one. It's like, oh my, which one do I pick? So for instance, I have one client that we went through, and they've got their genetic factors, got a lot of predispositions, they've got different SNPs and things. And so we do the diet, we look at the diet and how the stress really affects their overall outcome, and how like the emotional trauma from their childhood is now translated into that they have these chronic digestive disorders that they can't really get through. And so it really helps to activate those genes. So those genes now, where they were predisposed to having difficulty with microbial imbalances or different food intolerances, now get activated because of their history has like turned on and off those genes. So that's where the epigenetics, you've got this methylation cycle, which is why you hear about MTHFRs, because that's the core of this on-off switch. That methylation is what turns these things and activates whether or not those rungs, you're actually going to, like you said, those split rungs, are we going to need to go through that step or not? And so it's going to activate those kinds of things.
I think the biggest one that I see in my practice is I see patients either with a personal or a family history of breast cancer, and also anyone who has a history of any estrogen pathology like uterine cancer, uterine fibroids, endometriosis. Just recently, I had a young girl in my practice, not that young, but a premenopausal girl who was having endometriosis pain, and thankfully she was educated on functional medicine, so she wanted to be proactive. We did her genetics, and she did have some problems with MTHFR and COMT. So I know that, Salena, we get frustrated with people who try to kind of do it yourself, and they find out they do 23andMe, they find out have MTHFR, and right away they want to know, what can I take, right? What supplement or what SNP? So why don't you tell us your opinion on that?
Yeah, so on the SNPs, yeah, that one I definitely get very frustrated with, is that we have this mentality that, okay, I need a pill for that. And so when we go to the natural route, and we start looking at our genes, we want to take a natural approach, we still have that same mentality of, what supplement do I go take? I've got the SNP and now I need to go take a supplement. So that's where I usually get on my little soapbox about, we cannot do that. And the reason why is because we have this internal symphony going on. And when it comes to MTHFR, it's one SNP out of thousands of SNPs. And so if we take that approach, then we're going to have thousands of supplements to be taking now. And like on top of that, it's going to affect many things. And we also don't know that just because you have a SNP doesn't mean that it's expressing those epigenetic factors. If you are doing the right things, the SNP is not, even though it has potential to have a lot of consequences, we can support them. It doesn't mean that those things are completely broken and they don't work. It just means they have a little more potential need for support, that we maybe have a turn and where we should have been straight, but it's still going to, work to some degree. So when we support those things, we can live a life where we don't show, like those agouti mice, they had the genes for obesity and for those things, but because they were supported, the body is able to overcome those SNPs. So just because you have a SNP, an MTHFR SNP, don't run out and get methylated vitamins. You're going to hear, oh, I need to take methylated vitamins because my methyl cycle is not working. That is so untrue. I mean, you may need those things, absolutely, but if you start pushing those things, you can really start pushing other cycles, and you've got to really the whole biochemistry, everything involved in the big picture. We don't just want to focus only on one SNP, just like the conventional medicine only focuses on, oh, my endocrinologist only focuses on one thing, the cardiologist only one thing. They're all compartmentalized. We can't do that with our SNPs. Please don't compartmentalize your SNPs and just pick out what you have these problems and start supplementing for those.
Right, I totally agree. And I always like to pass on knowledge after I've made mistakes myself. And so when I was still doing a lot of traditional medicine, we were testing for MTHFR because at one time it was relevant to obstetrics. And that was before I really understood a lot of it. So I had patients early in my functional medicine days that I said, oh, you have MTHFR, you need to take this. And they reacted horribly because I didn't know their SHMT, I didn't know their BHMT, I didn't know their COMT. If you have MTHFR and you take too many methyl groups, then you start making too many neurotransmitters. And if you can't get rid of them because your COMT is slow, you may feel even worse. So that's the first mistake that I've seen happen. And the second is that people can over-methylate. So you can be under-methylating, over-methylating. So I myself have 3 out of 4 significant MTHFR SNPs, which is pretty rare. And I don't like to be a rare case, but I'm a pretty rare case. And so, of course, what did I do? I started taking methylated vitamins. And I did everything else that Salena said. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress. And so totally changed my diet and started eating a raw food diet at lunch every day. With all the green leafy vegetables I was getting so many B vitamins. And then all of a sudden I started, every time I would take my B vitamin supplement, I started getting hives. And I'm not a hive person. I don't get hives. So I couldn't figure out why all of a sudden I was having all these symptoms. And I've had it happen in more than one patient that all of a sudden they start being over methylated. So, Salena, that's a great point as far as not treating one SNP and looking at the whole thing. And that's why I know working with either a functional medicine provider or a health coach or someone who's knowledgeable about that is important. So I want to make one more comment about COMT, and then I want to hear a little bit about the testing that you're doing. So the COMT enzyme is another big one that I see a problem with, because that is an enzyme that has a couple functions specifically for women. One is it is the second step of estrogen detoxification. And 2, it is also how your body gets rid of dopamine, which is your neurotransmitter that gets things done and it helps you with motivation. and epinephrine and norepinephrine, which also give you energy. But if you have too much of those two things, can give you anxiety. So I see this manifest a lot, because if you think about it, think about a highway that has 4 lanes. And all of a sudden you're a young girl, you're doing okay. Let's just say you have a COMT SNP and it works very slow. So instead of 4 lanes, you've got a 2-lane highway. So when you're just trying to get your neurotransmitters, you might be a little anxious as a child, maybe not. And then all of a sudden at puberty, guess what happens? Estrogen has to come and share that highway. So you've got so much more traffic with your dopamine and your norepinephrine and your estrogen. And guess what? There's a backup. So there's so many things that affect traffic. Not only if there's a backup, is it because it's 2 lanes and 4 lanes, or is it because there's 5 inches of snow? Is it because there's construction? Is it because there's an accident, which is a temporary thing? So there's a lot of things that can help that, but those are 2 of the biggest things that I see and 2 of the most important SNPs. But I really prefer to do a bigger, like Salena said. I mean, if we look at methylation alone, there's a lot of genes that have to do with methylation. Unfortunately, because genetics is not covered by your insurance, it is out of pocket. So the more genes you test, the more expensive the panel is going to be. So we do run some testing that is included with some of our Genova testing, which is urine testing, where you can do a swab for just MTHFR and COMT. That's sometimes helpful. But then we also have some methylation panels that are a little bit bigger, that give us a little bit more of the genes that control your enzymes that get rid of your serotonin as well. So if you're someone struggling with anxiety, headaches, migraines, those kind of things. And we also just started offering something called Nutrients. They may have changed their name, where not only do you get a lot of your estrogen-related genes looked at, as well as Alzheimer's. I also have a marker to put me at increased risk of Alzheimer's. So you see those, and they also make supplement recommendations that the company actually customizes supplements for you and gives you your supplements. So those are the ones that I've found that are really great. And then I know Salena and I was just looking at what you were doing, and I really liked your company that you're using. So why don't you talk about the company you're using and also the package that you're offering?
Yeah, and let me, before I get into that real quick, I just want to talk about, because you mentioned like the COMT and what you look at, one of the things that was one of the questions that we had was about the, someone had asked about their blood pressure. And what I see a lot, because I deal with the autoimmunity and the gastrointestinal, is the detox pathway, which is kind of, I look at the trio for me is you've got your neurotransmitters, you've got your methylation, and that detox. And those 3 of those have to work harmoniously, because when any of those are out of whack, when you have that slowed down highway, then other streets, then all of a sudden these backup pathways, those can also get overloaded. And so the detox that I see a lot, and I want to just touch on this real quick, is why another reason it's important to not just all of a sudden just start taking a supplement for whatever SNP, is that we get into a situation where we have like a clogged toilet. So we're going to try to use, we have this detox pathway that's backed up, not working well. We don't continue to use that until we have that toilet working. If we still try to use this clogged up device, it's going to make a huge mess. And so the same thing happens with like the children that I see with autism, ADHD. When there's heavy metals involved, we got to be very, very careful about the detoxing of these things and looking at this, all the biochemistry going on inside. That's, I think, what I see the most in my practice, and the others that I talk with, is I've changed the things that I'm doing. I've been taking these supplements. I've been doing a cleanse, and I feel worse. And so if you are one of those where you do these cleanses and things are worse, that's a big clue that we've got some 2-lane highways, or probably some 1-lane highways somewhere. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick, and which leads to why I really like the software in the company that I'm using, where I get my genetic testing from. I've done quite a bit of research on looking at the different options for genetics. And I've done a couple other places before. So the one that I'm doing now that I just really has blown me away with the number of SNPs that they have. So they check over 200,000 SNPs, which if you're familiar with 23andMe does about 600,000. But the 23andMe and a lot of these others are like what Dr. Scott was saying, they're about your ancestry. It's like, I don't really care about what part of the world I came from. I want to know, why is it my body is responding this way? Why does my child have autoimmunity? Why is your body responding that way? What can I do to help you? I can't do much about, okay, you came from Europe. great. It doesn't help us to fix what's the problem. So
let me interject really quick about the 23andMe since you're on it. I don't mean to interrupt, but that they've changed the chips several times. And so what we're seeing is even with 23andMe, we're not getting the full amount of data that we used to get. And they're also listing non-significant SNPs. So
exactly.
report, and also there was a study done in California that showed 20% of the time they incorrectly reported ApoE44, which is the Alzheimer's marker. So that's really concerning to somebody that you want to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's, and your risk is incorrectly reported. So we are really trying not to. The only way we do that is if the patients already come to us with that, but we prefer not to use it. So I didn't want to hijack what you're saying, but I wanted to not forget to say that because I know a lot of people are doing that because they're having a Black Friday sale. So it's great for ancestry. It's kind of fun to look at, but it's not meaningful genetic information. So
right.
Talk about what
yeah, that was actually my next thing. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's the next thing is that they have 600,000, but when it comes to what's pertinent, they maybe have 6,000, and they've taken out like those what you're talking about, the MAOA. I think they may have the COMT, but a lot of these SNPs that really are these key places, they no longer even report on. So the one that I use is 200,000, about 15,000 pertinent SNPs that you're going to get to know, hey, what's going on epigenetic wise? These are the epigenetic factor type genes that we're going to look at that epigenetic areas. And so we take those 15,000 genes and we can overlay them with your symptoms. And so we look at that symptom part, like what are the problems that you're having? Are you having anxiety? Do you have a difficulty with digesting different foods? Do you have eczema? These different autoimmunity diseases, like so many of those things get triggered. We can look at the symptoms and see which pathways are involved. It helps us to really hone in on that biochemical pathways going on. And then on top of that, we can take your lab test and see, hey, how is the body expressing? What are the metabolites coming out of here? What is your body telling us as well? We take the symptoms, and then your lab results really tell us, are these genes compromised? Is there a one-lane highway where there should be a four-lane highway, or is your four-lane highway working totally fine? And so that gives us all pieces to the puzzle where we can look at where you're at, what your body's telling us, these biochemical going on, and what are your genes? Are they predisposed or are they not predisposed? We can see, because even if you have a perfectly fine gene, you still can have a problem methylating. You can still have a difficulty in those neurotransmitter pathways. You can still have difficulty through detox or whatever. And so that's why it's really important to look at everything in context. So that's what I do, and what the company that I use and the software that I use, we can look at it all and make it much more simpler to present to patients and clients. Say, okay, hey, look, this is a condensed version of all these biochemical things and all that symphony going on, and it really empower and equip you with practical information. So, okay, we can do something about this and actually formulate a plan to support the body in healing. Instead of just saying, okay, here's your SNP because of that lab test, or here's your SNP because of that, SNP or supplement I meant for those things.
So obviously your approach as a health coach is a little bit different. Being a OBGYN physician, patients are coming to me with a specific complaint, like I have irregular periods or I have this. So sometimes during that workup, as we're trying to get to know their body, we discover that potentially they would have a problem with genetics. Then we do the genetics. So sometimes we're not always approaching it like you are, because we already have this information and then we're doing the genetics. So if a patient, like someone in this Facebook group, wanted to work with you because they were thinking that they had a symptom that they think something's wrong with genetic, how would they go about that, and what would that look like? Can you walk us through the steps using the test that you're doing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I can share a link with you guys on what I do. I just basically, you go in, you click on the link, and there's a video on that kind of goes over the overview. You order your test kit, you schedule a time with me, we will do a consult. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get your test kit back. So once you order the test kit, then I send a link to you for your initial set of questionnaires, about 200 questions that really gets into a lot of your health history, what symptoms you're experiencing, that sort of a thing. And then you get your test kit, and it's just one of the kinds that you just spit in a little tube, you send it off, you got to register it because it's all private. There's no names or anything like that connected to it. So you have like a barcode, and you just have to register that to your client portal. And then about 6 weeks, sometimes 8, but I've had them as soon as 4 weeks. So between 4 and 8 weeks, we get it back. And then we schedule a time and we go over, what are your results? What does this, mean? And we spend about an hour on a consult together. And I'm going to help to show you where these genes are expressing at and the things that you can do to prevent things, or where you need to be aware of. What, this is an area that you might want to really work on, and develop a strategy plan to change the course of your health, or develop a strategy plan to keep your health in a really, really good place where it's at right now, just to kind of give you a heads up. It just really depends on where you're at and what it is that you need. But we develop, a plan with you to say, okay, hey, this is what the direction that I need to go and the things that I need to be aware of.
So basically it's like maybe 2 visits or 2.
Yes, it's just like a 30-day, you've got 30-day access with me on that. So we do the 1 hour, after the 1 hour consult, you've got 30 days after that to message me. I've got a private portal on that. You can message me if you have other questions that you want to ask, because I know that you more than likely will have more questions after you start getting all this information. So you've got 30 days where, we can message back and forth. And then I also have other packages. Like if you realize that, oh, you know what, I've got some issues that I'm needing help with, then I've got other packages. I've got package with Dr. Scott. There's other ways then to take, okay, if I'm needing more help, then we can find a way to get you more help with whatever it is that's going to work for you.
And the other thing that Salena has done is she has a fantastic free resource.
Oh yeah, I forget about that.
5 things that you need to know about genetic testing. And so she has graciously agreed to share that for all of you. All of you listening, and so she will post the link in this. We'll put the link in the post, since now we're not live anymore. So we'll put the link in the post, and it'll be a direct link for you to download that genetics guide.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we didn't have any questions. I'll take one more quick look. You answered the questions about and we probably didn't because we're not live.
Oh, there was the one about the blood pressure. I wanted to answer her real quick. She said, I'm doing everything I think is possible to reduce my blood pressure physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. Could my high blood pressure really be genetics? So I wanted to answer that real quick, but yeah, absolutely, it could be genetics. But I'm not sure what you mean by, is it because I have this gene, so I'm just destined to have this problem? In that regards, I would say no, that you're not destined just because you have a gene. And so it's really the epigenetic factors that are involved, which gets to those detox pathways. There's an NOS, nitric oxide gene, which is big when it comes to our cardiovascular system. And that one ties right into the COMT, where that nitric oxide cycle needs to be working well. If it gets stuck, well, then it starts shifting to a really bad nitric oxide situation. And that's where you really start seeing the chronic cardiovascular issues, circulatory blood clots, and all of those kinds of things involved. Diabetes is when we have, it's called NOS uncoupling. And so when you are having this chronic blood pressure type of things, then that's when I would be looking at genetics, not just because if I have, oh, this SNP, I'm destined, but which of these pathways here, and maybe I'm predisposed, that I've got to help support these things. And the nitric oxide one is one where you could be doing all these right things and still not get anywhere, because you've got to address those in a very specific order to get that nitric oxide back into that bioterran, the BH4 recycling component. And so that's what I would say on the genetics part, is that you may be predisposed. The nitric oxide is what I'd be looking into and researching, and then working like with Dr. Scott, because she is just amazing on that, with that COMT and with those neurotransmitters and with those cycles, to support those things from the ground up, and from what these underlying, looking at that, where's your toilet clogged at, and working systematically backwards, especially if you're doing all the right things and you're not really seeing issues or seeing improvements on that.
Well, great. Thank you for your time today, Salena. And Salena is our technical wizard, so she's going to just give me the podcast then when it's done, and I'll upload it into our private Facebook group. Salena is also a member of the private Facebook group, so she can also answer your questions. So after you watch this, if you want to post your question, if you were hoping to have watched live, I'm sorry, you can still post your question. We'll both be monitoring the posts, so we can make sure we get your question answered, and we'll provide the links to the free download for the genetics, and a link to Salena's site. And also, I'll just post the book Dirty Genes as well, as something that we always both refer to as a reference. So I hope you guys are having a great day, and I hope this is something that was helpful to you, because this is an area where I really see huge rewards and huge dividends with patients. And the nice thing is about it's a test you only have to do once.
Right, exactly. There's no have to follow-up test. That's one of the best things about it is we ain't got to do it again.
All right. Thank you so much, Salena, for
Sure.
today. And yeah, so we'll put all those links there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This was great.